We are getting clarity, basically, that Canada is in the same position it was this morning as it is at the end of the day with markets closing, right?
That's right. We've had our White House bureau hustling, Andrew, to get some clarity. It's been a crazy few hours because the Treasury Secretary was on the White House lawn, and when asked whether Canada and Mexico would have this 10% baseline tariff attributed to them, he said yes, but our Katie Simpson in the Washington bureau has got confirmation that Canada and Mexico are not getting the 10% baseline, that tariffs on steel, aluminum, autos are unchanged. So that is some clarity about the position for Canada. But this has been really just a chaotic few hours for global trade policy. And it's just a continuation of the on again, off again, flip-flopping of this administration. You know, earlier this week, Donald Trump insisted that a pause was off the table. And then this morning, a very brief tweet on social media saying that he was paused, and when he spoke to reporters, he said he was doing it because people were getting yippy and afraid. You know, trade policy is generally not conducted in this way. It's very difficult for businesses to plan, and not only are we getting a pause, but we are getting basically a 90-day extension of this uncertainty cliff. Now businesses are still wondering, you know, what do they do in 90 days? How is this going to affect them? And many businesses that I've spoken to have told me that they basically are just pausing their activity. They are not shipping, they are not hiring until they have some clarity about what happens next.
Yeah, I mean, it has really been a wild day, you're right. So the markets were equally confused for much of the day, but there was a major surge following Trump's announcement.
Yeah, you could just see the immediate reaction. Investors looking for any bit of good news or an off-ramp of this trade war. And so you can see markets are just about to close. They've just closed at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And the TSX closing in positive territory. The U.S. markets, a huge day for U.S. markets. This is on track to be one of the best days for U.S. markets in decades. The S&P 500 up 9%, NASDAQ up almost 12%. Tech stocks are really seeing a boost. Apple, Nvidia, both up double digits. And, you know, that has really been a huge gain for investors. Where we are not seeing this kind of positive reaction is in the bond market. And that was a big concern last night when bonds were selling off. Bonds usually are a safe haven for investors. And we are not seeing this kind of positive reaction in the bond market. So that could be continued uncertainty. But, you know, for all of the Wall Street experts who were pushing the White House to have this 90-day pause so that they could negotiate and take some time, they're all very happy. Andrew, Bill Ackman, hedge fund manager, tweeting, thank you from all Americans. All right,
Nisha, thank you. The CBC's Nisha Patel. So I want to bring in Paul Beaudry now. He is with the Vancouver School of Economics at the University of British Columbia, and he's a former deputy governor of the Bank of Canada, and we've reached him in Vancouver. Paul, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
My pleasure.
What do you make of this day? What do you make of this moment?
It's one of these kind of continuation of continuing this uncertainty. Obviously, it was a good thing to have the pause. It would have been better to have certainty all the way through and have things that aren't moving around. So, yes, things are looking better by the end of the day of having this pause, but at the same time, it's just a pause, and we don't know how much the Trump administration might change or might do things during this period, or might come up with something else. It hasn't stopped them from doing other things. So there's still a lot of uncertainty out there.
I mean, Paul, it has been really hard for us to kind of cover and try and figure out what is going on, because we were getting conflicting information out of the White House from the Treasury Secretary, who said this applies to Canada, and then we were scratching our heads thinking that doesn't really make sense because the reciprocal tariffs never really did apply to Canada. Now we have confirmation from our Katie Simpson in Washington that, in fact, it's status quo for Canada, that the tariffs and the counter tariffs between Canada and the United States are what they were this morning. So what do you make, though, of that kind of raucous ride and just the uncertainty of it all?
Well, it just tells you how unplanned these things are. For there to have this much of communication difficulty, it means even people that are on the Trump team don't have all the information, so it's hard to communicate. Knowing when you reverse like this, and especially if you do it on social media, we don't get all the details. for the cases that were a bit special, like Mexico and Canada, that weren't under that last week's announcement in this kind of general tariff increase, it just made it very confusing. But we're kind of getting that clarity now. And so, and again, for the Canadian aspect directly, this means not much change. But overall, it's still a good news for Canada. Have to say, when the rest of the world is a bit more kind of a bit better situation, the U.S. in a bit better situation, that's good for Canada. But again, lots of uncertainty.
Both the U.S. and China, they have increased their retaliatory tariffs on goods. China holds a significant amount of U.S. treasuries, which were being sold off before the pause was announced. How significant is that?
I think that's the most significant thing. We don't know exactly what brought the Trump administration to change its mind today, but there's a good chance that kind of problem in the basically U.S. government debt market was not going very well. Those prices were increasing, and that they were decreasing, and the returns were kind of increasing in the sense that the cost of financing the American debt was going up. That's a bad sign. Usually that's thought as being the safe haven. Usually during crises like this, people go to American debt as this kind of good place to invest money. Now they're pulling out, and that's a really big scare because that increases the cost for financing the U.S. deficit. And, that was a big problem. So that hasn't changed that much right now. And that's going to be looking forward. Is that going to calm down? How are people going to think? Or is it just we've really changed the world with the Trump administration making that debt just feel less safe?
Do you think, because a lot of people were watching what was happening on the markets and there was a lot of concern that this would drive the U.S. right into a recession and maybe take Canada along with it, and there could be a global recession. Do you think concerns around a recession are now less heightened than they were from just a few hours ago?
Oh, yeah, certainly this helps. At the same time, again, don't want to kind of minimize where we are. 10% tariff around the world is still a big tariff. The tariff with China and really this trade war, this extreme trade war with China is still not a small thing. So that's not good for the global economy, not good for the U.S. economy, nor for Canada. But still, this kind of change and having this pause on these more general tariffs is a good thing. And so, yes, we're in a better situation than we were this morning, but we're still not out of the woods.
And so with Canada, where are we exactly?
Well, like I say, here in terms of Canada, we really have certain sectors are really being affected. We have to think the car industry is directly affected. The steel, the aluminum industry, those are really kind of directly affected, and we're going to feel that, and that's going to be difficult. We have some aspects that we kind of put some tariffs on the U.S. Those are also sectors that will see some price increases. So overall for Canada, like I say, today was more of a positive news because the overall aspect. But still, this is going to be difficult. These are parts that we're going to go through. But especially seeing how the U.S. will adjust. Will a lot of firms just decide to kind of postpone investment? Will a lot of consumer sentiment still be quite negative during this pause period? And again, I don't want to minimize this aspect of a trade war with China is not a small thing. China is a big country, and fighting that with the U.S. at these levels of tariffs is really hard. That's not good for the global economy, not good for the U.S., and therefore not good for Canada.
What do you make of the president basically saying if you retaliate, you're going to get hit hard like China was? What do you make of that messaging?
Well, it's certainly, it's one of those risks. We're kind of playing this game with the Trump administration right now, trying to figure out what is kind of reasonable type of countermeasures to take. At the same time, you want the world to kind of stand up. Now, have to remember, he did this exactly at the same time today. He's playing a bit of a game of saying it's only China. The EU kind of came out saying they were going to put some counter tariffs on. Now they don't have it. Now it's more negotiation. So I do think there's kind of an opening up there of the Trump administration to say it really does want to renegotiate a little bit, kind of making some of this trade war kind of reduce. We'll see how that applies for Canada, but it's certainly a risk whenever Canada is putting a countermeasure that the Trump administration could turn around and kind of make us pay even more.
Do you think this could be the beginning of a walkback from Donald Trump when it comes to tariffs, that hardline tariff policy that he seemed dedicated to?
Well, it's certainly a walkback. Now, how far it's a walkback, you always have to think where we would have been like a little while ago. The idea that we would have said, okay, I don't know, a few weeks ago that you'd have a 10% tariff on the rest of the world and 100% plus on China, we'd say that's already a really big, strong kind of tariff position. That's where we are right now. And on top of it, what we have on the particular aspects for Mexico and Canada on top of that, that's already lots of tariffs. It's true, there was this whole other level up. So yes, it's a walk back relative to the extreme position that a lot of us were surprised last Thursday of kind of what, the Wednesday night kind of coming into Thursday, what came out of all that tariff aspect. It was exaggerated. So we're kind of walking back relative to that very high level, but we're still in a high tariff and a kind of tariff war type of situation.
What would your advice be to if you were advising Canadian government officials in terms of how to now manage Trump and any more kind of measures that could come? Maybe softwood lumber levies are going to go up maybe tomorrow, for instance?
Yeah, to me, we really want to kind of say, we're not interested in a trade war. We want to kind of have good relationships with the U.S. That's where we've been trading for a long time. Obviously, we're trying to diversify more, and we should be doing more of that. But as the message to the Trump administration is really saying, we're open, we want to negotiate these things and get these things down, and kind of it's the benefit for both the U.S. and for Canada.
Paul, great to talk to you. Thank you. Paul Beaudry in Vancouver.
My pleasure.